Warewulf by David Dunwoody. Read by the author. I jumped. Through the ice rings, past the black stars and the great assembly, I leapt like a comet. I tore free of the dark world and curled into a sphere and sheared my cosmic bonds. My insides screamed and exploded against my ribs. My hairs grew brittle in the frozen void. But through chaos and absolute nothingness alike, I prevailed, my mass drawn inward from a sphere to a point. The stars had been right for my escape, and they had to be right for my descent. I had to find an approximation of the physical form I had left behind. On the dark world I had been the beast, six-legged, razor-toed, fire-eyed. My fur was sleek when matted with blood, and when the blood dried, great spines stood erect on my back, and the planet quaked at my baleful howl. Once I had purged the dark world of all life, the gods grew bored with me, content to leave me there to rot. But I jumped. Freedom! And at last I chose my new vessel. Warewulf, says the rectangular sarcophagus in which I lie. The words are garish crimson and bespeak slaughter and mayhem, for such is my nature. Made in China, it says. Made in China is a declaration of war, of the terror I will soon unleash. This new body, this shell, is not exactly like my prior self. I do not have the bone spurs that fanned about my neck in moments of orgiastic glee. I do not have the elastic flesh which stretched and cracked and bled with every breath. It is more like a suit of armor, this werewolf. No matter. The spirit remains the same, and soon I will be freed from this box, and I will begin to build a new box, a charnel house. There is the issue of my limbs. They are poorly articulated, and I fear I cannot manipulate my arms other than to move them at the shoulder. My claws are locked into a stupid gnarl, as if I would carry a parchment. I am no page boy, but the beast! Warewulf, made in China 2003! No, the page boy is a pale biped known as Joey, who thrashes me about in my box. He hugs me to his chest and tells me that soon freedom will come. I will take special pleasure in peeling the lenses from his eyes. For this I will probably not use my gnarled hands, but the prophesied special hinged jaw, which is currently bound with some sort of magic tie. Warewulf is obviously a legendary figure on this world. The new legend will be greater still. I will rot in the steaming entrails of my victims, of Joey and his people. Once this world is dead, I shall rise into the night using the spring jump action in my taut hind legs, and I will seek new victims. For I am Warewulf. A, I scream. A, Duracell! And my copper heart boils with bloodlust, and my eyes glow red, and I await my release. Made in China. The Room by David Dunwoody. Read by the author. The room had changed. It was almost imperceptible. In fact, he couldn't even pinpoint what it was that had changed, only that it had. That sense of subtle discord was nothing new to him, and felt the same as all the other times. The times that were folly, irrational, figments of his fevered ruminations. But this time he knew something in the room was aberrant. Moreover, he knew he hadn't caused it. He never argued against the label obsessive-compulsive. It described his manner perfectly. On the nose, between the toes, pencils in measured rows. It fit him to a T, his favorite letter. Sharp, uniform, perfectly symmetrical. Right angles, perpendicular, just as the pencils were to the edge of the desk. He noticed a mote of dust clinging to that edge, and swept it into his palm with a snarl. The room had changed, and he could think of nothing else until he knew how. He turned slowly, taking in every detail in a smooth, panoramic view. The few pieces of furniture and their modest adornments all seemed to be in their places. Seemed. Seeming wasn't being. His eyes, wet orbs, were flawed instruments, and he knew he couldn't trust them. His head snapped to the left. Something... There! That blank square of wall. Something was different there. Something was wrong. He situated his face millimeters from its surface and scrutinized it. Goddamn paint with its textures and imperfections. Liquid. Weak. Senseless. Stupid. His eyes drifted to the light switch, and he moved to check that. It was off. 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 5 checks of the light means good night. But it was morning. He shook his head with a grunt. Couldn't start doing evening rituals at sunup. They'd lose their meaning and come unanchored along with that pale, sloping switch. But it was the wall, something about it. And again, he blinked, growled. The room hadn't changed, it was changing. And it would only continue until he discovered the source. Goddamn wall. His neck and back ached from stooping to examine it inch by inch. There were pills he could take in the right front corner of the desk drawer, lid opening with a counterclockwise half-turn to dispense 2 of 18 remaining pills. But no, this wasn't his little disorder at work. This disorder wasn't in him, it was all around him, encroaching now. He spun and barked at the opposite wall, knowing it was somehow altered. Out with the magnifying glass. He sat on the floor and wiped the lens until it was spotless, then crawled to the newly offending wall. God, he felt sick already. It was getting harder to focus. He'd never discerned the changes slowly taking over this room until all he knew of it was gone. And what then? What would he have? He pressed his eye up against the lens and the lens up against a raised line of paint toward the bottom of the wall. 3-inch line where some goddamn idiot had been too lazy or stupid or both to smooth it out. Same 3-inch line as always, though, with the tiny chip 2 inches in. But not the same wall. Not the same room. Please! His voice strained through gritted teeth, fist tight around the handle of the magnifying glass. He checked the line of paint again, then moved along the baseboard. Stop, stop, stop! He didn't know if he was talking to himself or the room. Whoever was listening, he supposed. Neither was. His sighs fogged the lens, and he rolled onto his back to wipe it down again. He saw the ceiling. Changed. He brought his fist down on the floor, heard the lens crack, let out a strangled yelp. His legs went limp, and he couldn't move. He began to chew his knuckles. Oh God, oh God, oh God! His pop used to call it the Debo, proper pronunciation, devil. But Pop was laying the accent on thick, telling the boy how it was hobgoblins running amok in his head that made him scared of sidewalk cracks and forced him to clear his throat 3 times before entering a room. They playing with you like a puppet. He'd learned to expect as much from his father and his father's women, caught up in their own superstitions. The Debo was slowly, degree by degree, changing this room, this ordered sanctuary, into a living chaos, and the mind of its occupant was turning to oatmeal as he drew his knees in and clawed at his palms. He'd tried behavioral therapy, tried the medication, tried screaming at himself in the mirror before he'd finally thrown that out. There was no wearing down or waiting out this hydra of his. When one head was cut off, 2 more emerged and sank their fangs into one another, and twisted, and quivered, and stared. All he'd been able to do was remove chaos from his life, piece by piece, until it was as simplified and sterile as possible. He'd removed the relationships and the interests and the ideas and left himself a little cube wherein he could be at peace. The room wasn't a cube anymore. It was softening, sagging, turning into something fluid. He was drowning. Why? Why? He pushed his fists into his eyes. God, he was going to throw up. Being trapped in this shifting space was like being in a cosmic tilt-a-whirl. Trapped? Couldn't he just leave? He eyed the door. A new terror gripped him. What if it was worse out there? And why wouldn't it be? He'd spent years cultivating his little corner of reality, and if it was going to pot, then it would only be a waking nightmare beyond that door. He put his face against the floor and refused to look anywhere else as he crossed the room on his hands and knees. If only he had the nerve to pluck his eyes out. But then he'd have to lose the hands, too, wouldn't he? And his ears. If only he could wall himself up in a little white room in his mind, a room without reference, dimension, definition, or stimuli, because the devil is in the details. He gnashed his teeth together and went rigid when they melted. The feeling, like marshmallows between his gums, then a warm pudding running down his chin, caused a scream to erupt from his throat, but it emerged as a mere sputter and sent white paste all over the floor. He flailed at the mess and watched, quite numb, as the fused flippers his hands had become flopped about uselessly and melted onto the floor into rippling, living pools that turned like pinwheels. The contents of his sleeves poured out, and he felt his ribs softening and his head drooping like a sack of wet trash. And he couldn't scream. But he didn't want to. As the substance and structure of his being came apart, he felt an odd calm. He could feel the turning pools on the floor, some small as a single droplet, others containing the volume of his innards. His eyes fell into his skull, and he was glad at last to be rid of them. His skull was separated from his body now, turning in place, becoming unformed clay on a potter's wheel, and then water swirling on the floor. Then the floor was soaking him up. And this was better than being shut up in a room, or a mind, wasn't it? Not senseless at all. The freedom of this new state, of no control, was unlike anything he'd ever thought possible, unlike anything he ever thought he could accept or embrace. The room hadn't changed at all. He had, and he was glad for it. He was thinning into a clear fluid and running into every microscopic crevice. He let himself go. Walls are born to resist. Water has no enemies.